I never thought I'd have to fight for my own child. Not in a million years, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. And mine came hurtling at me in the middle of Willow Park on what started as a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. It was one of those rare sunny days where everything felt just right. The kind of day that makes you forget about your laundry list of adult problems. My daughter, Lily, was playing happily in the sandbox, her golden curls bouncing as she laughed and built castles with her little plastic shovel. I sat nearby on a bench, scrolling through my phone but glancing up every few minutes to check on her. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, even. That's when she showed up. At first, I didn't think much of her. She looked like any other mom at the park. Jeans, sneakers, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose. She walked over to the sandbox and plopped down beside Lily without so much as a hello. At first, I assumed she was just another parent trying to keep an eye on her kid while multitasking on her phone. Except, she didn't have another kid, just mine. Lily didn't seem bothered by her presence. In fact, they started chatting like old friends. The woman complimented me daughter and how cute she was, which should have been sweet, but something about her tone rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't warm or friendly. It was calculated, almost rehearsed. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. People compliment kids all the time. It's not exactly breaking news. But then things took a turn. The woman leaned in closer to Lily, brushing sand off her tiny hands like she'd known her forever. "You're such a good girl," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I bet your mommy doesn't appreciate you enough." "Excuse me?" I stood up immediately, my heart pounding. "Hi," I said sharply, walking over to them. "Can I help you?" She barely glanced at me, acting like I was invisible. Instead, she focused all her attention on Lily, who was now looking confused. "Do you know who I am?" the woman asked her gently, tilting her head to the side. Before Lily could answer, I stepped between them. "I don't know who you are," I said firmly, "but this is my daughter, and we're fine here. Thank you." For a split second, I thought she'd back off. Maybe she'd apologize, say she mistook Lily for someone else, or claim she was just being overly friendly. But no. Instead, she smiled, a slow, unsettling smile, and said, "Oh, honey, you must be mistaken. This is my daughter." My blood ran cold. What did she just say? Before I could respond, she reached out and grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her closer. "Come on, sweetheart," she cooed. "Let's go home." Home. What was happening? Was this some sort of sick joke? My mind raced as panic set in. Who was this woman? How dare she waltz into our lives and try to take my child? I wanted to scream, call the police, do anything to stop her, but I froze. All I could manage was a weak protest. "No, that's not true. She's my daughter." Lily looked up at me, wide-eyed and unsure. For a moment, I saw doubt flicker across her face. That scared me more than anything else. If she believed this stranger, even for a second, it would destroy me. The woman smirked, clearly enjoying the chaos she was creating. "Really?" she challenged, raising an eyebrow. "Then prove it. Prove it. Prove that the little girl standing in front of me, the one I'd carried for 9 months, nurtured, fed, bathed, and loved with every fiber of my being, was mine." How could anyone ask that? The situation spiraled from there. Other parents in the park began noticing the commotion. Some stared openly, whispering behind their hands. Others pretended not to see, avoiding involvement like it was contagious. Meanwhile, the woman refused to let go of Lily's hand, her grip tightening with each passing second. I knew I had to act fast. But how do you fight against someone so brazen, so determined to tear apart your world? I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, but all I cared about was getting Lily back. This woman, this complete stranger, was trying to take my child, and no matter how hard I tried to reason with her, she wouldn't budge. Her grip on Lily's hand tightened, and my heart sank as I realized she wasn't going to give up easily. "Listen," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You don't know what you're doing. That's my daughter. My child. Let her go." She smirked again, like this was some twisted game she was winning. "Oh, really? Then tell me something only a mother would know." Her tone was mocking, challenging, as if proving my relationship with my own child was some kind of test I had to pass. My mind raced. What could I say? Should I mention the tiny scar on Lily's knee from when she fell off her bike last summer, or the way she always hums while brushing her teeth? But before I could speak, Lily looked up at the woman and tugged her hand free. "I want my mommy," she cried, tears streaming down her face. She ran straight into my arms, clutching me tightly like she never wanted to let go. Relief washed over me so strongly that I almost collapsed right there in the sandbox. For a moment, I thought it was over, that the woman would realize she'd made a huge mistake and leave. But she didn't. Instead, she crossed her arms and glared at me, her expression darkening. "This isn't finished," she hissed under her breath. And then, louder for everyone else to hear, "You can't hide behind lies forever." What was wrong with her? Who did she think she was? The audacity of her words left me speechless. Did she honestly believe anyone would side with her after seeing Lily run to me, sobbing and calling me mommy? It was insane. Completely and utterly insane. Other parents were starting to gather around now, forming a loose circle around us. Some looked concerned. Others seemed more curious than anything else. A man with a stroller stepped forward cautiously. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, glancing between me and the woman. "No," I snapped, pointing at her. "This woman just tried to take my daughter." The crowd murmured among themselves, their whispers growing louder. Someone suggested calling the police, which felt both terrifying and necessary. I didn't want to escalate things, but what choice did I have? If this woman thought she could walk away without consequences, she was sorely mistaken. The stranger rolled her eyes dramatically, as if the idea of involving authorities was ridiculous. "Go ahead and call them," she sneered. "They won't find anything wrong with me. I'm the victim here, not her." Victim? Was she serious? My hands trembled with anger. How could anyone be so delusional? Still, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation as calmly as I could manage. The dispatcher assured me officers were on their way, but every second felt like an eternity. The woman stood there smugly, not budging an inch, while Lily clung to me, her small body trembling with fear. As we waited, I tried to piece together who this person might be. Had I ever seen her before? Was she someone I'd accidentally crossed paths with? A disgruntled coworker, maybe, or a neighbor with a grudge? Nothing clicked. She was a complete enigma. And that scared me more than anything. Finally, after what felt like hours, 2 police officers arrived. They approached cautiously, their expressions neutral but alert. One of them addressed the woman first. "Ma'am, can you explain what's going on here?" She launched into a rehearsed-sounding story about how Lily belonged to her, how she'd been searching for her lost child for months. Her words were polished, convincing even, but they were also completely fabricated. Every lie she told felt like a punch to the gut. When it was my turn to speak, I showed them pictures of Lily on my phone, photos from birthdays, holidays, everyday moments that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was mine. I handed over her birth certificate, which I kept in my diaper bag for emergencies, anything to prove the truth. For a while, it seemed like the officers weren't sure what to make of the situation. But eventually, one of them turned to the woman and said firmly, "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us." Her confident facade cracked for the first time. She opened her mouth to protest, but the officers cut her off. "Let's go." As they led her away, I'd finally allowed myself to breathe. Lily hugged me tighter, whispering, "I love you, Mommy." Tears filled my eyes, not just because of what had happened, but because I knew we'd gotten through it together. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly over. The police took the woman away, but the weight of what had just happened didn't leave me. My hands were still shaking as I held Lily close, her little arms wrapped tightly around my neck. The park felt eerily quiet now, despite the crowd that lingered nearby. People whispered among themselves, some shooting sympathetic glances in our direction, while others stared openly, as if they couldn't believe what they'd witnessed. "Are you okay?" a voice asked gently. I turned to see the man with the stroller, the one who'd spoken up earlier, standing beside me. His expression was kind, concerned. That was intense. I nodded weakly, unsure of how to respond. How could I explain that I wasn't okay? That no matter how hard I tried to shake it off, my heart was still racing, my mind replaying every second of that horrifying encounter. I forced a small smile instead. "Thank you for helping," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. He nodded and stepped back, giving us space. Slowly, the other parents began to disperse, returning to their own children or heading home. But even as the park emptied out, I couldn't bring myself to move. My legs felt like lead, and my chest was tight with anxiety. What if she came back? What if this wasn't the end? Lily tugged at my sleeve, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Mommy, can we go home now?" she asked softly, her big eyes searching mine. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, forcing another smile. "Let's go home." The walk back felt surreal. Every car that passed by made me flinch, convinced it was her asterisk coming to finish what she'd started. Each shadow on the sidewalk seemed darker, more menacing than before. By the time we reached our front door, I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally drained. Once inside, I locked the door behind us and double-checked all the windows, something I hadn't done in years. Then I sat Lily down at the kitchen table and knelt in front of her, holding her hands in mine. "Lily," I began carefully, "do you remember what happened today?" She nodded, her lower lip trembling slightly. "That lady said I was hers." My throat tightened, but I swallowed hard and kept going. "She wasn't telling the truth, baby. You're my daughter. Always have been, always will be. Nobody can change that." "But why did she say that?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "Why would she lie?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell her. How do you explain something so cruel to an innocent child? Finally, I settled on the simplest answer I could think of. Sometimes people make mistakes or get confused. She thought she was doing the right thing, but she wasn't. "Okay." Lily nodded slowly, though I could tell she wasn't entirely satisfied with the explanation. Neither was I, honestly. Who was this woman? Why had she targeted us? None of it made sense. Later that evening, after putting Lily to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at my phone. The police had taken the stranger into custody, but they hadn't given me many details beyond that. They promised to investigate further, but until then, I was left with nothing but questions and fear. I scrolled through social media absent-mindedly, hoping to distract myself, when a notification popped up. It was from a local news app. ***, woman arrested for attempted child abduction at Willow Park. ***. My stomach dropped. I clicked on the article immediately, scanning the text for any new information. According to the report, the woman identified herself as Karen Miller, a 38-year-old resident of a neighboring town. She had no prior criminal record, but authorities discovered during questioning that she'd been involved in multiple custody disputes over the years, all of which ended in her favor. Custody disputes. My blood ran cold. Was that why she targeted Lily? Had she somehow convinced herself that my daughter belonged to her? Or was there something darker at play here? As I read further, the article mentioned that Karen had recently lost custody of her biological child due to allegations of neglect. Friends and acquaintances described her as obsessed with motherhood and unwilling to accept that her parenting days were over. One neighbor even claimed Karen had once said, "If I can't have my own family, maybe someone else's will do." Chills ran down my spine. This wasn't just a random act of desperation. It was calculated, premeditated. Somehow, Karen had chosen **us**. But why? Out of all the families in the park, why had she picked mine? I spent the rest of the night combing through old photos, documents, anything that might give me a clue. Did I know her from somewhere? Had we crossed paths without realizing it? Nothing stood out. Yet the more I thought about it, the more certain I became. This wasn't over. Karen might be in custody, but her obsession wouldn't stop there. And until I understood why she'd come after us, I wouldn't feel safe, not for a single moment. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My mind was still spinning with questions about Karen and what she wanted from us. The sunlight streaming through the window should have felt comforting, but instead, it only highlighted how exposed we were. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every unfamiliar sound outside sent my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that she, or someone like her, was watching, waiting. Lily seemed quieter than usual, too. She sat at the kitchen table picking at her cereal, her little brow furrowed in thought. "Mommy," she said suddenly, looking up at me, "is that lady going to come back?" I froze for a moment, unsure of how to answer. How do you reassure a child when you're not even sure yourself? "No, sweetheart," I said finally, forcing a smile. "The police are taking care of her. She won't hurt us." But as the words left my mouth, I realized how hollow they sounded. Even if Karen was behind bars, her actions had already shaken our world. Trust, the fragile thing that holds everything together, felt broken now. Would I ever be able to relax again? Would Lily? Later that day, I received a call from Detective Harris, the officer who'd been assigned to our case. He asked if I could come down to the station to discuss some new developments. My stomach churned at the thought, but I agreed. If there was any chance of understanding why this happened, and ensuring it wouldn't happen again, I had to face it head-on. At the station, Detective Harris greeted me with a solemn expression. "We've learned more about Karen Miller," he began, gesturing for me to sit. "And unfortunately, it's not good news." He explained that during further questioning, Karen admitted to stalking several families before targeting mine. She'd spent weeks observing us. At the park, outside our home, even at the grocery store. According to her, she chose us because we seemed perfect. Perfect. I repeated, stunned. What does that even mean? Detective Harris sighed. To her, it meant stable, loving, happy. She believed your family represented everything she'd lost. In her mind, taking Lily wasn't just an act of desperation. It was almost like reclaiming what she thought she deserved. My hands trembled as I processed his words. This wasn't about me or Lily specifically. It was about her twisted perception of us. We weren't people to her. We were symbols. Symbols of a life she desperately wanted but couldn't have. "And now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happens now?" "She'll be charged with attempted abduction," he replied. "But given her history, we're pushing for additional charges related to stalking and harassment. Still, I need to warn you, cases like this can drag on. Even if she's convicted, there's always a chance she could appeal or find other ways to cause trouble." His warning hit me like a punch to the gut. No matter what happened legally, Karen's obsession might never truly end. And until then, we'd live under a cloud of fear. On the drive home, I replayed the conversation over and over in my mind. How could someone become so consumed by jealousy and loss that they'd try to destroy another family? It didn't make sense. But then again, maybe it didn't have to. Some wounds run too deep for logic to heal them. When I got home, I found Lily coloring at the dining table. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, and for a brief moment, the heaviness lifted. Despite everything, she was still my bright, beautiful girl. Our bond was stronger than anything Karen could throw at us. But as much as I wanted to believe we'd be okay, I knew I couldn't ignore the danger anymore. That evening, I installed extra locks on the doors and set up a security camera system. I called Mark, Lily's dad, who lived out of state, and filled him in on everything. His voice cracked with anger and worry, but he promised to visit as soon as possible. "You can't go through this alone," he said firmly. "We'll figure it out together." His words brought tears to my eyes, not just because I needed the support, but because hearing him say "we" reminded me that I wasn't alone. As scared as I was, I still had people who loved me, people who would fight for us. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, I kissed her forehead and whispered, "No matter what happens, I'll always protect you." She smiled sleepily and hugged her stuffed bunny close. "I know, Mommy." Watching her drift off to sleep, I vowed to do whatever it took to keep her safe, even if it meant facing my own fears. Because love isn't just about joy and laughter. Sometimes, it's about standing strong in the face of darkness. And no matter how hard things got, I refused to let anyone take that away from us. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and preparation. I couldn't stop thinking about Detective Harris' warning that Karen might not give up, even if she was locked away. Her obsession with perfection, with replacing what she'd lost, felt like a storm cloud looming over our lives. Every knock on the door made me jump. Every unfamiliar car parked down the street sent my heart racing. I hated living this way, but I didn't know how to turn it off. One afternoon, while Lily napped, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If Karen thought she could control our lives from afar, she was wrong. I needed answers, real ones, and I wasn't going to wait for the police to hand them to me. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I dug deeper into Karen's past. Using public records and social media, I pieced together fragments of her life before she came after us. What I found chilled me to the bone. Karen had been married once, to a man named Greg, but their relationship ended in divorce after allegations of neglect surfaced during custody battles over their son, Ethan. From what I could gather, Ethan had been placed with his father permanently, leaving Karen completely cut off. Friends described her as unstable after that, spiraling into isolation and bitterness. One acquaintance even mentioned that Karen used to post cryptic messages online about finding a new purpose. It all clicked into place. This wasn't just about losing custody of her child. It was about feeling erased, abandoned by the world. And somehow, in her warped mind, targeting families like mine gave her a sense of power. The more I read, the angrier I became, not because of her actions, but because of the pain that drove her to them. Still, understanding her motives didn't make me feel safer. If anything, it made her seem more dangerous. That evening, Mark called again. His voice was softer this time, filled with concern. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm managing," I lied. Truthfully, I was barely keeping it together. Between protecting Lily, dealing with nightmares of my own, and obsessively researching Karen, I was stretched thin. But I couldn't let him worry too much. He already planned to visit next weekend, and I didn't want him dropping everything to rush here prematurely. "Listen," he said after a pause. "I've been thinking. Maybe we should talk to a lawyer, just to be safe." "A lawyer?" I echoed, surprised. "For what?" "For peace of mind," he replied firmly. "If Karen tries anything else, even years from now, we need to be ready. Restraining orders, documentation, whatever it takes. You shouldn't have to handle this alone." He was right, of course. As much as I wanted to believe the police would handle everything, I knew better than to rely solely on them. People like Karen slipped through cracks all the time. If we didn't protect ourselves, no one else would. The next morning, I reached out to a local attorney recommended by a friend. Her name was Rachel, and she specialized in family law. After hearing my story, she agreed to meet with me later that week. When I walked into her office, I felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief because I was finally taking action. Dread because I knew this was only the beginning of a long, exhausting process. Rachel listened intently as I recounted every detail, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "You're doing the right thing by coming forward," she said. "People like Karen thrive on fear and silence. By standing your ground, you're taking away her power." She outlined a plan. File for a restraining order against Karen. Document every interaction, no matter how minor, and ensure our home security measures were airtight. She also suggested reaching out to a therapist, not just for me, but for Lily too. "This kind of trauma doesn't disappear overnight," she explained gently. "Talking it through can help both of you heal." By the time I left her office, I felt a flicker of hope, a small but steady flame pushing back against the darkness. For the first time since that day at the park, I allowed myself to imagine a future where Karen no longer controlled us, where Lily could laugh without looking over her shoulder, where I could sleep without waking up in a cold sweat. But hope wasn't enough. Not yet. As I drove home, I reminded myself that safety required vigilance. Love meant protection, and I intended to shield my daughter from harm, at any cost. The restraining order arrived a week later, thick and official in its manila envelope. Holding it in my hands felt surreal, like clutching a shield against something I couldn't fully see. It was supposed to offer protection, but deep down, I knew it was just a piece of paper. If Karen truly wanted to hurt us, no court order would stop her. Still, having it gave me a small sense of control, a reminder that I wasn't powerless. Mark arrived the following weekend, his presence immediately calming. He hugged me tightly when he walked through the door, as if trying to absorb some of the weight I'd been carrying alone. Then he knelt down to Lily's level, smiling warmly. "Hey, kiddo," he said, ruffling her hair. "How's my favorite girl?" Lily beamed up at him, momentarily forgetting the tension that had become our new normal. Watching them together reminded me how much she needed both of us, not just for protection, but for love and stability. That night, as we sat around the kitchen table discussing next steps, Mark looked at me with determination in his eyes. "We'll get through this," he said firmly. "Together." Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly to fortify our lives. We installed motion sensor lights outside the house, added a video doorbell, and even enrolled Lily in self-defense classes designed for kids. At first, I worried about scaring her, but she seemed excited by the idea of learning superhero moves. Seeing her laugh during practice sessions made me realize that maybe resilience could grow alongside fear. Meanwhile, Rachel, our lawyer, kept pushing forward. She filed additional motions to ensure Karen remained under strict supervision while awaiting trial. She also connected us with a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery. Our first session left me emotionally drained but hopeful. The therapist encouraged me to focus on rebuilding trust, not just with Lily, but within myself. "Fear thrives on uncertainty," she explained gently. "Reclaiming your routine will help you feel safer." Slowly, life began to settle into a fragile rhythm. We avoided the park where it all happened, opting instead for quieter outings like picnics in secluded spots or walks along wooded trails. Each day brought tiny victories. Lily sleeping through the night without nightmares, Mark teaching her how to ride a bike without training wheels, me finally opening the curtains wide enough to let sunlight spill into every corner of the house. But then, one evening, the illusion of safety shattered. I was cooking dinner when the phone rang. Caller ID showed an unknown number, which usually meant telemarketers, but something told me to answer anyway. "Hello," I said hesitantly. A low, chilling voice responded, "You can't hide forever." My blood ran cold. It was Karen. Somehow, despite the restraining order, she'd found a way to reach me. Her words slithered through the line like venom, paralyzing me with fear. Before I could respond, she hung up, leaving only silence behind. Panic surged through me as I called Detective Harris. He assured me they'd tracked the call and tightened security around the jail facility where Karen was being held. But his reassurances didn't ease the dread coiling in my chest. How had she managed to contact me? What else was she capable of? That night, I barely slept. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound louder. When Lily crawled into bed with me, trembling from a nightmare, I held her close and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep. "It's okay, baby," I murmured. "Mommy won't let anyone hurt you." Yet as dawn broke, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, I realized something important. Fear might linger, but so did strength. Karen had tried to take everything from us, but she hadn't succeeded. We were still here, scared, yes, but unbroken. And as long as we stood together, nothing could tear us apart. For now, that was enough. The trial began a month later, and it felt like stepping into another nightmare. The courtroom was cold and sterile, the air thick with tension. Karen sat across from us, her expression eerily calm, as if she didn't realize, or care, how much damage she'd caused. Every time she glanced in Lily's direction, my chest tightened. I held Lily's hand firmly, silently promising her that I wouldn't let anything happen. Mark stayed by my side, his presence grounding me. He leaned over and whispered, "You're stronger than this. Remember why we're here." His words steadied me, but they couldn't erase the fear gnawing at the edges of my mind. What if the judge didn't see through Karen's lies? What if she walked away free to try again? Detective Harris took the stand first, recounting the events at the park and detailing the evidence they'd gathered against Karen. Then Rachel stood up, presenting photos, documents, and even recordings of Karen's chilling phone call to me. Each piece of evidence felt like a brick being laid in a wall meant to protect us. But it was Lily's testimony that struck the hardest. When the prosecutor asked her about the day at the park, Lily spoke softly but clearly. She said I was hers, she explained, clutching her stuffed bunny for comfort. But I told her no, I'm my mommy's. Her words broke something inside me, a mix of pride and heartbreak. My brave little girl had faced her fear head-on, and I couldn't have been prouder. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back, refusing to let Karen see my weakness. Karen's lawyer tried to paint her as a troubled woman who'd made a mistake, someone deserving of sympathy rather than punishment. For a moment, I worried the jury might fall for it, but then Detective Harris returned to the stand, explaining how meticulously Karen had planned everything. From stalking us to choosing the exact moment to strike, it became clear that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was calculated and deliberate. Finally, after hours of deliberation, the verdict came, guilty on all charges. Karen would serve 5 years in prison, with mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave, but it was bittersweet. 5 years wasn't forever, and I knew we'd always carry the scars of what she'd done. Afterward, as we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed us, asking questions about how we felt and what message we wanted to share. Mark stepped forward, shielding Lily and me from their cameras. "We just want to move on," he said firmly. "This has been hard enough without reliving it every day." And he was right. Moving on, that was all I wanted now. Not forgetting, but healing. Over the following months, life slowly started to feel normal again. We stopped checking over our shoulders constantly, stopped jumping at every unexpected noise. Lily returned to playing outside without hesitation, her laughter filling the air once more. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. One evening, as we sat together watching the sunset, Lily turned to me and asked, "Mommy, do you think she'll ever come back?" I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. Finally, I said, "Maybe someday, but not anytime soon. And even if she does, we'll be ready. We're stronger than we were before." She nodded thoughtfully, then smiled. "Yeah, we are." In that moment, I realized something important. While Karen had tried to take so much from us, she'd also given us something unexpected: resilience. We'd faced darkness and come out the other side still standing. Love, I learned, isn't just about joy or peace. Sometimes it's about fighting tooth and nail to protect the ones you care about most. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I wrapped my arms around Lily and whispered, No matter what happens, we'll always have each other. That's what matters most. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it.